Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. We're part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Joey Dwyer. We will talk about the end of Vanderbilt's basketball season and try to look ahead to next year as best we can. Always lots of moving parts on the roster. And by the way, we did this one on Thursday afternoon before the Sweet 16 games of Thursday night. Joey appears on the guest line. That is presented by Michael Kendrick of the Kendrick Group. Michael is a local carpenter and a lifelong Vandy fan. He builds bookshelves, cabinets, picture frames, furniture, and made-to-order items, including a display case for my prized Dale Murphy jersey. I've seen Michael's work. He's a true craftsman. If you're in the market for custom woodwork, give Michael a call at 615-830-9458. Now on to our interview with Joey Dwyer. Joey Dwyer joins us. Joey, of course, has been our basketball guy all year. Vanderbilt finishes its season with a loss to UAB in the NIT. Joey was there to cover it. Joey, first of all, thank you for joining us. Second of all, parting thoughts on the season after last night's loss to UAB.
Yeah, it was probably a better season than we had anticipated at the end of 2022. It felt like Vanderbilt was kind of dead in the water there after non-conference play. Really had nothing on its resume and then found a way to make a push. Certainly another year of progress for Jerry Stackhouse, but not quite enough. Like I mentioned about last night, it feels like this program took another step, but the next step is the tournament, and it's kind of a non-negotiable. That has to be the goal next year, and this year his program got real close but didn't hit its ultimate goal.
I thought last night UAB was just too quick and athletic for them. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. It felt like Vanderbilt actually stayed in the game because of reasons that it hadn't recently. It stayed in the game with its rebounding, shots blocked, and defense to an extent as well. It held UAB to some pretty solid percentages if you're Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's offense just didn't give it enough, and ultimately, when you have Jelly Walker on the other side, you can't get away with scoring 59 points, especially against the UAB team with bigs and also other guards that could give you some good things. Felt like Vanderbilt just, maybe for the entire NIT, with the exception of a lot of the Yale game, hasn't really had what it had at the end of the regular season and in the SEC tournament, but was good enough to get by against those teams. Not exactly what you'd hope for in the NIT, though, and last night was kind of that. Vanderbilt's offense felt pretty similar to the first time I was at Memorial for the Memphis game, just felt kind of stagnant. Settled for too many threes, didn't get enough good looks, and kind of rushed some things. So it just felt like Vanderbilt was kind of off a step last night, and that led to the season coming to an end.
Okay, Joey, I want us to spend the bulk of our time today looking to next year and what the roster and expectations could or should be like for next year. And let's just go ahead and start. We'll get to the recruits and the portal later. Coming back, you would expect would be who?
Ezra Manjon has said he will be back. I would assume Tyron Lawrence is back, and that's a great start for this program. Obviously, one of the better backcourts in the league, and if you said that a few months ago, I'm not sure we would have believed you. It feels like we said it a lot, but it feels like that backcourt really came into its own, and Ezra Manjon was kind of the catalyst for this team getting going. Tyron Lawrence was a big piece as well. Kind of looking at the rest of the roster, Paul Lewis, barring a transfer, which I don't expect, will be back. Then you'd have the rest of the freshmen, Noah Shelby, Colin Smith, Malik Dia, Lee Dort. Solid class. Hopefully Vanderbilt, for their sake, can keep that class together. Quentin Malora-Brown has said he'll be back, and Trey Thomas also has some eligibility, and barring a transfer, will be back. So a decent team coming back. Probably need a difference maker or two. And then Jordan Wright's obviously the big question mark. Last night said he hadn't really made a decision yet on his future. Has 1 year eligibility left. Is a guy who Jerry Stackhouse seems to love and has been a big difference maker for this team down the stretch. Whether Wright comes back or not probably determines how much Vanderbilt needs to be active in the portal. Kind of determines their outlook too. Jordan Wright, Jerry Stackhouse is called the glue guy for this team. he guarded Hunter Dickinson for a lot of that Michigan game, which kind of sums up what you're looking at there. Jordan Wright had 15 last night, and has just been a big piece of this team. Probably not as big of a piece as we had assumed in the preseason. Tyron Lawrence kind of took that title of the alpha scorer on the wing, but Jordan Wright's obviously an important piece to this team, and a guy who can give them some lineup versatility, and a guy who can obviously be a huge catalyst for them next year. That's probably the biggest domino we're waiting on right now. Then they'll go in the portal and try to address Wright's absence if he does decide to leave. Even if Wright decides to stay, probably need a difference maker or two. I know you wanted to talk about returners, but just there's a lot of dominoes to fall, and the returners kind of bring you into those.
Yeah, I'm going down the roster alphabetically. Guys who could return: Dia, Dort, Lawrence, Lewis, Magnon. This is scholarship guys. Quentin Malore-Brown, Shelby, Colin Smith, Trey Thomas, Jordan Wright. So that's 10 guys. What do you think? Maybe they get 7 or 8 of those guys back?
Yeah, Stack even said last night that they don't really even know what they'll have back. They could lose some guys, and obviously they've been planning for that. It seems like Vanderbilt right now doesn't have a spot. Even with Studi leaving, Wright leaving would open up one spot. So they've got to be expecting some transfers. They've reached out to a lot of guys in the portal, have been about as active as anyone, as Jerry Stackhouse said. And then you have the 3 freshmen coming in, so the numbers are real tight right now, and they're still recruiting 2023. MJ Collins, 2023 guy, is still waiting, and he's going to make a decision in April. I assume that relies heavily on what Vanderbilt's numbers look like. So I guess we'll see in the next week or two probably kind of where Vanderbilt's outlook is in terms of the transfer portal, but I'd expect them to lose some guys. I don't know exactly who that'd be, but feels like they're probably going to lose some guys with the way they've recruited the portal and the way they're still looking into a 2023 guy in MJ Thomas.
Well, my guess is I think Wright is the obvious one that everybody's wondered about, and we're not really sure where that is. There seems to be a lot of ambiguity there, maybe would be a fair way to put it. And, of course, Dort and Shelby just didn't play much, and certainly didn't play much at the end of the year. And, you know, you wonder there a little bit when kids aren't playing what's going on or not going on.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you whether those guys are going in the portal or not. Shelby's obviously the one that didn't play the most, and I think that was for fair reason. A lot of people give Trey Thomas a lot of flack, but Stack loved what Thomas gave him, and I guess to an extent I get it. He was able to run a lot of stuff that ended in a Trey Thomas touch. Noah Shelby can obviously give you that, but has some room to go on the defensive end, and Thomas does too. But Shelby, I think, has a little bit of developing to do just as in terms of a complete guard. Dort, I think, probably more so has to do with his injury. It just didn't seem like he fully got back up to speed. He told me he was comfortable, but looked like he maybe not lost a step, but just didn't look as in tune as he did before the injury when he was really starting to come into his own a little bit. But yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly who's going in the portal, but it's hard to think that there's not anyone going in there. Vanderbilt's already lost one, and that was before the season ended. Now the season's over, so really expect some decisions to be made pretty soon here.
If I were going to put an over-under on the number of scholarship players returning, would 7.5, you think, be in the ballpark?
I would guess so. I mean, the two guys have to leave. You got a lot of guys on the roster, and regardless of how good you're playing basketball at the end of the year, hard to keep everybody happy. And I'm not saying anyone's inherently unhappy, but it's kind of just how the sport works nowadays. And if Stack can keep a lot of those guys, great for him. But also with the way they're recruiting the portal, seems like he's maybe not as confident that he can keep, 13 guys?
Yeah. I would say my confidence, if I had to say, here's 7 guys you could see return, I would go Magnon, Lewis, Lawrence, Thomas, Smith, Dia, Malore-Brown. That's not that those other guys couldn't return, but like if you had to pick 7, would those be the 7 you'd take?
That's probably what I would go with as well. It feels like, I don't know, there's some freshmen at the end of the bench that you kind of wonder about, but I haven't really got a definitive answer on how they're feeling either way, so I don't want to speculate too much. But yeah, that's kind of what I would feel like as well. And you feel pretty good about that if you're Vanderbilt. You can probably go get a difference maker here or there in the portal if that's the returners, and you probably have a chance to make some noise with that team, even if you don't get one or two more difference makers.
Yeah, and let me be clear. This is just Joey and I thinking out loud a bit, not reporting, speculating more than anything. And look, Wright, Shelby, and Lewis Wright, Shelby, and Dort, for all I know, could all be back, and two or three other guys could leave. Whoever those would be. But I'm guessing, like, if I had to, place a bet on it right now, it might be somewhere more in that range. And so let's just start with those 7 and say those are your guys coming back. Tell me what you think the 3 they bring in give them next year.
You're talking about the freshmen?
Correct.
So I'll start with Isaiah West. He's kind of the guy who gets brought up first with this class. I think Isaiah West is the guy who's going to play the most and is going to give them the most minutes out of anybody in that class. Isaiah West is a guy who maybe won't be a double-digit scorer next year, but feels like a guy who could be a high-level ball handler, who could play both guard spots. He can score it a little bit. His high school coach raves about his defense, so feels like West is kind of the difference maker in this class. I think J.Q. Roberts is the guy who maybe the wild card in this class. He could be a guy, depending on how much off the dribble ability he's developed over the high school season, could be a guy who comes in and contributes a little bit. He's got to knock down shots on the perimeter, but at the worst, I think J.Q. Roberts gives you an Emmanuel Ansong type role next year. We've talked about that in the past, but Ansong is a guy who maybe didn't have the basketball gifts in terms of the off the dribble ability, didn't hit shots at as high of a level as some guys did on the roster, but gave Vanderbilt some really good minutes down the stretch of the NIT just by being a nice versatile defensive piece, providing athleticism and providing energy. I think J.Q. Roberts can give you that. And Carter Lang, I think, maybe a bit of a wild card. I don't know how much Lang's going to play next year. He's a little undersized. Still kind of trying to see where his role would be on this team with all the other bigs, especially young bigs on this roster. But I do think his basketball IQ and some of the things he can give you in terms of spreading the floor and not being a ball stopper could be valuable for Vanderbilt. I'm just trying to wait for the summer for him just to kind of see how he can compete with Lee Dort or Malik Dia, or if they bring in a transfer big. The minutes in the front court are a little more spotty to me than in the backcourt. I think West could be a guy who has a defined role. I could very easily see next year Ezra Magnon, Tyron Lawrence, Isaiah West, Paul Lewis kind of being the main 4 guards, Trey Thomas and Noah Shelby, maybe mixing in for some minutes there. But West, I think, is the guy who is going to give them some good minutes. I know they really like Isaiah West. They like his mentality. They like his toughness. And I think that's going to get him on the floor early, even if he's not scoring the way maybe Ezra or Tyron is. Paul Lewis can give them some good minutes as well. And I think Isaiah West would fit in nicely immediately, has a mature game, and can step in there. And then I think J.Q. Roberts is the guy who would probably be the next guy you'd think of in terms of getting playing time. But he's kind of a wild card to me. I'd like to see kind of how he fits into the offense in the summer and just kind of how much that athleticism can translate early on.
Yeah, and one reason I left Shelby and Dort out is just we haven't seen enough of those guys yet to know what they are. Now, Jordan Wright, if he comes back, we kind of know what Jordan is, and that would be a big get if they could get him to return next year.
Yeah, like we said earlier, Jordan Wright gives them a ton of versatility just in terms of what they want to run. They ran a lot of small ball with Wright at the 4, ran small ball with Wright at the 5, and obviously that's not ideal, but he can play the 3, he can play the 4. He can go on your best player and guard him, and he's one of the leaders in that locker room. So not only in terms of scoring output, Jordan Wright is a tremendously valuable piece to this team. You mentioned the other 2 guys. I've seen a good bit of them, whether that's on the circuit, watching their games, or in person at Vanderbilt games. I think Dort has some developing to do offensively, and obviously the fouling was a thing for him. But if Lee Dort can be a guy who gives you a few minutes a game, grabs some rebounds, blocks some shots, and just makes things a little bit difficult for guys around the rim, I think he could be a nice piece next year. Maybe not one that you want to rely on to play the minutes that Liam Robbins left, but I think he could give you a few good minutes here or there. I do think I'd like to see Vanderbilt address that in the portal a little bit, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But Dort, I think, is a guy who could be valuable next year. The backcourt's really crowded, though, and I think Noah Shelby's going to have to do a little bit of developing in the offseason if he wants to pick up some of those minutes, especially with the veterans in the backcourt if Trey Thomas stays, and then Lawrence and Magnon, obviously.
Okay, give me guys you think are truly in play for them, whether it's, you mentioned they're still recruiting kids in the 2023 high school class, and also they've been active to some degree on several kids in the portal.
Yeah, this is tough, especially with the portal, because with Notre Dame, when I covered them, they would reach out to 5 guys, and you'd know pretty early on who their priorities were. But with this group, Vanderbilt has reached out to about everybody who's put their name in the portal. Ledlum from Harvard's obviously a guy who could be a difference maker, could give them some good things that they don't really have heading into next year. They reached out to a few guards, actually, which I think they just view as difference makers. Damian Dunn from Temple is a guy from Jerry Stackhouse's hometown who they reached out to today. He had 38 points against Vanderbilt earlier in the year. There's a few other mid-major guards who they've reached out to, and I'm really just trying to do some digging there, see kind of where they could be. But Ledlum from Harvard, I think, is a guy who may be in play. I'd like to see more names, though, pop up. BJ Mack's a guy they made the top 10 for a few days ago. Sidney Curry's the guy they reached out to from Louisville. I think really what they're looking at is a difference maker in the backcourt, a difference maker on the wing. Maybe they get one of those two, and then they get a below-the-rim kind of big who can maybe get you a point or two here or there with a post touch, can rebound, can maybe block some shots, maybe not as much as Liam Robbins in that aspect, but can at least give you another dimension in your front court, another veteran in your front court. I think that's probably the biggest need for this team, and they've really gone after a lot of those bigs. Dame, I forget how to say his last name, Adelakun from, I believe, Dartmouth, is a guy from North Carolina as well, who Vanderbilt's been in on a little bit. I don't know what the interest level is there, but just kind of shows you the blueprint of guys they're going for in that front court, just below the rim, guys who can get you a bucket if you throw it down to them in the post, and guys who can be difference makers just in terms of in the backcourt, and guys who can be difference makers on the wing. They probably want one more scorer. We've kind of seen them reach out to those type of guys as well.
This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing, it's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. Yeah, Damian Dunn would be a yes, please, for sure. And like you said, he's from Jerry Stackhouse's hometown. That kid put on a show against Vanderbilt for sure. That and the Ledlum, and I remember it's been a while, so my memory's a little hazy. I feel like they were fairly involved with Ledlum the first time around. Guy that scores a lot, rebounds a lot. I mean, those two guys would be 100% takes. I don't know what the likelihood is there with both of them, but you get those two kids, you team them with Magnon, Lawrence, Colin Smith, some other guys. That to me is a tournament team next year.
Yeah, right now I'm just scrolling through my Twitter feed, just looking at all the guys I retweeted. There's so many guys that I'm not even putting up analysis of these guys anymore, but Ziggy Reed from Merrimack's a guy who would be a difference maker, averaged 14 points a game for them. Vanderbilt reached out to him. Talon Cooper from Minnesota is a guy who could give Vanderbilt some nice things in the backcourt and on the wing. They've reached out to. Just feels like Vanderbilt's really scanning the portal all over, and I don't know their priorities right now in terms of who would be takes, but you just look at all these guys that they're reaching out to, and with this point in the year, I kind of look out for prototypes, who they would like. They've reached out to mid-major guards. They've reached out to guys who can get their own shot, and they've also reached out to those bigs. So right now, my mind's kind of on prototypes, and as we see the list get cut, as we see kind of who comes off the board, I think we'll learn more and more where Vanderbilt's looking and who specifically they have their eyes on.
Yeah, there's a lot of variance in the way this could go. I mean, they land a couple of high-impact transfers. They keep the right guys. That's a good team next year. Lose the wrong guys, miss out by a little bit by a guy in the portal, a couple guys, missing out by a little and missing out by a lot of the same thing, and then who knows?
Yeah, tell Mike Bray that he got a silent commit from Hunter Dickinson and was right there with Jaden Ivey. That would have altered the Notre Dame basketball program. Yeah. Job right now. So I definitely get what you mean there, but I think it's nice that Vanderbilt's recruiting strategy in the portal is to kind of set that wide net and not put all their eggs in one basket. It feels like they're doing that with 2024 as well. So like the recruiting effort by the staff lately, but got to close, and I think this is probably the biggest offseason of Jerry Stackhouse's Vanderbilt tenure. If you get an impact transfer or two, you could easily be a tournament team. If you lose Jordan Wright and you can't replace him, a lot of variance there as well, like you said.
Yeah, I think they seem to have definitely have improved their recruiting effort. I like the players they're going after out of high school better than I have before, and I think they're working the portal. I don't know if it's more public or they're working harder. I think it's the second. That's what they need to do. I mean, that's what I've been screaming from the beginning is where they were lacking. And hey, get some of these guys, and you can take away a lot of the objections to why it's not going to work here, if not all of them.
Absolutely. Recruiting solves a lot of issues, Chris, and that applies to the portal. That applies to high school recruiting, and both of those seem to have positive trajectory for Vanderbilt right now. But you're right, you got to close. And the Perrys, Vanderbilt probably has to get at least one for you to feel really good about that class. They have Karis Bilal in 2024, who you feel good about. Tyler Tanner from Brentwood Academy, I think I'm going to try to make it over there at some point to go see him. He's a guy who could be a difference maker at the next level as well. So it just feels like the backcourt recruiting in 2024, the contingency planning there has been really solid. Time to close, though, and it's the same for the portal. I do think the staff's working really hard. But you got to close, like we said.
All right, speaking of closing, how about we do the mailbag and close this out?
Perfect.
All right, the mailbag is sponsored by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call, 615-846-6200, see what your rights are and if they can help. Commodores 94 says, what went wrong against UAB?
Offense. The defense and the rebounding and the block shots kept Vanderbilt in the game throughout the night, and I can't say that's happened a whole lot throughout the year. Felt like Vanderbilt might have won this one in a different way had it won. The offense was really poor, though, 33% from the field, 26% from three. Didn't get to the line all that often, and the difference was the free throw line as well. UAB shot 17 for 17, and Vanderbilt certainly didn't hit that mark. Just felt like the offense was a little stagnant last night. Didn't have the same oomph as it had throughout February and throughout early March. Just felt kind of a step slow last night, and UAB certainly made them pay for it. That's a really good basketball team that came into Memorial last night, and not one you can afford to score 59 points against with that level of efficiency.
Commodores 94, what pieces does the team need to make the tournament next year? I mean, I feel like we did a pretty good job of hitting on hypotheticals, but it feels like they need another impact scorer / rebounder, which Ledlum would certainly give them. And a big somewhere would be great if you could get it.
Yeah, I think you can certainly get a dirty work big somewhere in the portal. And even with Lee Dort on the roster, I think that would be a welcome addition, especially with a veteran. Here's the thing I have with the front court. You already have Quentin Malora-Brown, Lee Dort, Malik Dia, Carter Lang, J.Q. Roberts, and Colin Smith in the front court. I don't know how much of a recruiting hurdle that's going to be, but it certainly isn't a recruiting pitch to where you can say, hey, we need you to come in and be the number one big man. The guy who's going to come in is going to have to earn it. And I don't know if they're scared of any of those guys in particular, but that's a deep front court, and the numbers get tight there, and the minutes get tight there. He wants to play Lee Dort and Malik Dia next year, I'm assuming. Quentin Millora-Brown's going to get probably his normal minutes, and obviously you're going to lose Robbins' minutes, but I'm wondering how difficult of a sell that would be to a transfer. But like you said, I think they need one or two more impact scorers with or without Jordan Wright, and probably need something in the front court, whether that's a guy who can be a change of pace big, who can stretch the floor a little bit as opposed to some of those other guys, or whether that can be kind of the guy they've stereotypically looked at, which is a bruiser, below the rim type of guy.
I feel like the fan base a little bit is underrating Quentin Millora-Brown. Now, he's nothing more than what he is. He's a guy that can come off the bench and ideally give you 10 to 15 minutes a game. But he's a guy that they like. He's a high character guy from what it seems. He's a guy that knows the system, guy that's been around forever, guy that's happy with his role, seems to be a good chemistry guy, can give you backup minutes. Like, it's not like every team in the country or even many of them have a great backup center. To me, Millora-Brown, and we probably should have touched on this earlier, he's a guy that is a nice commodity in the right role. And if they fill in nicely around him, I think he's being a little bit underrated as a piece who could help them next year.
I think the key with Quentin Millora-Brown in terms of his offense is the point guard play. I think he was a lot better when Scottie Pippen was able to find him last year, and even this year when Ezra Manjon was intentional about getting him the ball off of a pick and roll, and they could find him around the rim. He could be a nice piece, but he's probably not a back to the basket. He's probably not a guy who's going to give you a commodity at this level of the sport. I don't know if a lot of teams have that. I said before the season, I remember if Notre Dame last year had Quentin Millora-Brown, they wouldn't be on the bubble. They would be a team that was firmly in the tournament, and I still believe that. I don't know if Quentin Millora-Brown is ever going to give you anywhere near 10 points a game or anywhere near 10 rebounds a game, but he's going to give you some nice minutes. He's going to play good defense. He's going to give you some rebounds and use some of his fouls and just be a nice kind of relief. Him and Liam Robbins were a really nice duo when used properly, and Liam Robbins obviously carried most of that load, but Millora-Brown was really nice in relieving Robbins when he needed to get off the floor for a minute here or there. Obviously, it's got to be about replacing Robbins' production, though, and I do think Millora-Brown gives them a lot in terms of returning as a veteran presence and just being able to eat up some of those minutes in the front court, because that's not easy in the SEC with all the physical bigs you're going to see. If you can have a dirty work big like Quentin Millora-Brown, certainly valuable at this level of the sport.
All right, Joey, here's the last question. This is from Ann Arbor Door. It's a long one. Would like each of you to comment on the net, its flaws, undervaluing strength of schedule, overvaluing win differential, no value to performance on last half of the season. Note the impact of transfers. A&M had 2 quad 4 losses in December, then had a lot of transfers and players who played better once the SEC season ended, and also baseline created in preseason rankings is all speculation. Seems like there are a lot of outliers, Utah State, for example, and a lot of outliers suggest they need to make more tweaks. And Sack says you'll schedule to favor more net rankings. What are the chances the NCAA makes adjustments? Okay. Joey, I'm going to start us here, and I'm going to do a little quiz, okay? I'm going to start reading down the net as it stood before the tournament. I'm going to get you to tell me whether these teams are in the tournament or not still, okay?
Okay.
This no trick questions here. This is pretty easy. All right, starting with number 1, and then I'm working down. Houston, still in the tournament.
They are still in the tournament.
Alabama.
They are in the tournament as well.
Number 3, UCLA.
My bracket had them losing to UNC Asheville in the first round, but they are still in the tournament.
Tennessee.
Yeah. Tennessee is in. That was a stupid pick, by the way, Chris.
Yeah, I would have steered you away from that one had I known. Tennessee at number 4.
They are.
Purdue at number 5. We know that. Gonzaga at 6.
Gonzaga's 6th in the net? Wow. But they are still in the tournament.
Texas at 7.
Yes, sir.
UConn at 8.
Correct.
Kansas at 9.
In the tournament.
No. Kansas is not in the tournament because it was beaten by Arkansas at 21, who people screamed what? I cannot believe Arkansas is 21 in the net. That's outrageous. Well, Arkansas beat Kansas. Okay, Arizona at 10. I've sort of made my point. Arizona at 10 got upset by Princeton. St. Mary's at 11 got beat by, who was it? St. Mary's got beat by UConn. So that was beaten by a higher team in the net. Florida Atlantic at 13, still in the tournament. People said too high. San Diego State at 14, still in the tournament. Baylor at 15. Baylor was beaten by Creighton, which is number 17. So here's the point I'm making if people haven't figured this out already. The net did a really amazing job at predicting what teams would be left in the tournament so far. And teams I've missed, Princeton was down, I think, around Vanderbilt's level. Michigan State is 33, or was 33 before the tournament. Kansas State is still playing. Kansas State was 24. Miami is in the tournament. Miami was 35. Xavier is still in the tournament. Xavier is 22. And that's it. So Joey, by my count, the net missed really badly on what? One team, Princeton? It nailed most of the field. So I'm sure this is going to be a very popular answer. I think the fans have looked at this through a very black and gold tinted lens, which that's what fan bases do, and used the outliers, which Vanderbilt was definitely an outlier. I said I would have put Vanderbilt in the tournament to justify to upend the whole system. If you look at what it's done in predicting who got this far, the net's a pretty darn good tool. Certainly a lot better than the RPI would have done.
Chris, you're going to be a popular man in about an hour, aren't you?
Yeah, they're going to love me for that. But look, every system has got outliers. Every system has outliers. Vanderbilt was an outlier, and I think you could have dealt with Vanderbilt's case accordingly. I thought Wisconsin was an outlier. I thought Wisconsin deserved to be in the tournament. What you had was a committee. I think it leaned a little bit more towards the Mountain West and the mid-majors. It let Utah State in. Utah State was 18 in the net. That's the one team in the top 20 of the net that and Iowa State, which just could not shoot that day, that just grossly underperformed. I mean, grossly. I don't know how bad they got beat, but I think we're using a very small amount of exceptions to prove some point that the net stinks when the evidence doesn't seem to suggest that it does.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. I think Vanderbilt's big win should be factored in, but I think a lot of the argument for Vanderbilt getting in the tournament has been based on things that maybe the committee doesn't look at as much. Obviously, it played its best basketball late. It won a few games in the conference tournament, but the committee hasn't looked at that as much recently. And I think it's ultimately a numbers game when you look at this. And Vanderbilt obviously wasn't helped by the numbers, the net. Obviously, Vanderbilt fans got what they wanted out of the net in terms of it becoming a talking point, because it certainly has been recently in its validity. So I think Vanderbilt fans have something there. They've generated some argument, but I'm not sure I know enough about the formula to really give you an opinion like you did, but it seemed like it did a good enough job. And I think ultimately if Vanderbilt was maybe 10 spots higher, it's in the tournament, but it would have been the lowest team since the net came out to get in the tournament. And I don't know if the committee was banging on the table hard enough for that, especially since Vanderbilt was not even in the first four out.
I think if you want to argue the committee could have done a better job of maybe digging in on the outliers, I could make that argument. But you're talking about, what, 5% of the at-large field? I don't think that quibbling around the edges and saying the committee made a bad decision is a good way to just say let's overturn the whole system.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is kind of how Vanderbilt has now embraced trying to game the system here in terms of the net. Jerry Stackhouse said last night they're going to look into scheduling differently. They're not going to schedule some of the games they scheduled last year. It's unclear if it's going to be all Power 5 teams who are going to have high nets next year, or if it's going to be all mid-majors who aren't high in the net, but Vanderbilt will pretty easily beat. I think the mistake they made this year was scheduling good mid-majors. There's a lot of mid-majors around that Vanderbilt could wipe the floor with, but they played two pretty solid ones that were at least in contention for winning their league. And I think that ultimately got them there. I think Vanderbilt was kind of in the middle a little bit too much in terms of its non-conference scheduling, and that's what hurt it in the net. It just feels like you either got to go one direction or the other based on what they're thinking at this point. I think it's certainly from the program, but it is interesting to me that they've kind of embraced this, which I guess kind of takes away the argument from how flawed is the net. They obviously still think they should have been in the tournament, but it is a sign of progress to me that they're trying to move forward in terms of trying to put it together a better tournament resume next year in that aspect.
I don't think their non-conference schedule kept them out. It was losing too many games in it. Now, look, here's the thing that I don't think people dug in on enough. The teams that they played that made it as at large as Memphis was, an 8 or a 9? Memphis was an 8. Mm-hmm. Southern Miss did make the tournament. These are teams that beat them. St. Mary's was in as a 5, probably a little bit overseeded. The net did love St. Mary's. I think that's one place if you want to pick flaws with the net, maybe that's a fair one, but not by. It's not like St. Mary's was a bad team. It still won a game in the tournament. VCU was a 13. NC State was a 10 or an 11. Pitt was an 11, and Dayton. Don't get me wrong, they were playing quality teams, but none of these teams were Kansas and Baylor or Purdue or Kansas State. None of these were teams that got like protected seeds or anything like that. That shows in the computer a little bit. Let's say they pick off NC State and they beat Grambling. At that point, they're in the tournament, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the schedule necessarily either. They had nothing of substance on their resume in early January. That can't really be the case. It's got to be a whole body of work, like we said. And we knew early on that Vanderbilt probably had as much of an uphill climb as anyone at that point in the year. Not because they scheduled so poorly, but just because they have to win those games. They had no quad 1 wins, no quad 2 wins coming out of that. Pitt eventually turned into one, but just felt like they didn't take enough advantage of those opportunities early. And I think there's room for them to schedule better. Obviously, I think they've accepted that as well. But when the schedule came out, I didn't hate it. I felt like that was probably a good enough schedule for them to get in the tournament based on strength of schedule, just because of the opportunities you have against teams that are beatable, like VCU or NC State, teams that you can go get those wins against, but aren't going to be bottom feeders, aren't going to be teams that are impossible to beat. I feel like in terms of the Power 5s and kind of the A10 type schools they schedule, I think those were good schools to schedule in terms of the resume. But the only thing I would change is trying to find mid-majors you could beat up on a little bit more rather than ones that are actually going to be good teams. But that's hard nowadays. So I don't know if the schedule was the main issue, like you said as well. I think it was them not taking advantage of opportunities, and they showed flashes of good basketball at that point in the year. Temple was a really solid outing for them, but they got better at the end of the year. If they had played anywhere near that level, picked up 1 or 2 more wins, like you said, they're probably in the tournament. So I think non-conference play is maybe the most important thing that Jerry Stack also will have to do in the fall in terms of building that schedule and getting his team ready. Not that they weren't ready early in the year, but getting them to play at a higher level earlier in the year.
Okay, well, and let's look at what they did, okay? They played 3 teams that everybody would have argued would have been in the NIT. They beat Yale by 9 points at home. They beat Michigan by 1 point at home. And then they lost by 8 points to UAB at home. So they played 3 teams. They played them 120 minutes. They played them all at home. And they outscored those 3 teams by 1. That part would suggest they were an NIT team. So would I put them in? Yes. Was it the most egregious error in the history of the selection committee? Like some of the fan bases argued, I don't know how you go there and say that definitively. Should they have been in? Yes. Should it? I mean, was it awful? I don't think it was.
Yeah, I think if they could have picked up another quad 1 or 2 win there, and then Southern Miss had stayed a quad 2 loss, you're probably looking at something different there if they hadn't had that quad 4 loss.
Maybe so.
I mean, it wasn't a lock NCAA tournament resume, but it was one that at least got them in the conversation. Now, the next step has to be making the tournament, and I think they're completely locked in on that. I think they need to relish in this pain if they think they got in, and use that to not pout about it, but go get in next year.
Any parting thoughts on basketball?
It's a heck of a season. My first season on the beat. Probably the best of Jerry Stackhouse's tenure. Just want to say thanks to everybody. Said it last night, but really appreciate all the support, and thank you, Chris, for the opportunity. Very cool season to cover.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job, and looking forward to next year. And Joey, when the roster is more settled, let's do this again and talk about the roster when we know what it's really going to look like.
For sure. There'll be some rapid reactions out as well if Vanderbilt gets some commits, and we'll try to keep you updated on what we're hearing on the board over the next few weeks. But again, really nice season for Vanderbilt. Time to take that next step towards the NCAA tournament next year, though.
Absolutely. All right, he's Joey Dwyer. He's our basketball guy. We'll have him back on again as soon as things are settled. And Joey, again, thank you so much for your contributions here.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.